And now to join us is George Hemingway, who I did personally ask to sort of come and present again at our symposium. He had been the lead speaker 2 years at the Progressive Mind Forum. I love the way he thinks and the way he presents his ideas. He is the managing partner and leads the innovation practice at Stratalis, where he advises leaders of companies and organizations and countries on the future and how to succeed. He is considered a leading futurist in the mining industry, and he has advised many of the world's leading companies such as Vale, Anglo American, BHP, on how they can best pivot and transform their company to succeed. And in addition to the corporate boards, he is very passionate about supporting the next generation of leaders. He is a board member to the Chamber Orchestra of New York, the Moonmark Aerospace, and the Lassonde Institute of Mining at the University of Toronto. He holds an MBA from Columbia University, from Columbia Business School, and a BS from the Stern School of Business at New York University. Please welcome George Hemingway. And right off the bat, I do want to ask you, you do focus on uncertainty for a living, and it has been a crazy year and a half.
It has been a crazy year. Thanks for having me, Robert, and thanks again, everyone, for being here today. I mean, it's been a nutty year, and it doesn't seem nutty. Couple of years doesn't seem to be changing very much. And what I think is interesting about it is just how resilient we are. I mean, if you think about it, a year ago, folks were still hunkered down. We were wondering if we were ever going to get out of this. And now, even though we've got variants and people are still getting infected and so on, I think a lot of people, maybe the majority, at least that I know, have moved on in their own way. And now for at least a lot of folks, conversations back to normal stuff, politics, the economy, who's going to trigger recession first, the US, China, how do we keep people from leaving and retain talent? And the last time I spoke at one of your events, I think about 2 years ago, I talking about uncertainty, I said that in times of great uncertainty, people tend to do one of two things. They either tend to hunker down and gravitate to the stuff that's familiar to them, right? Tradition, religion, family, or they tend to rise up and rally up against something, fight some kind of injustice, do something with their pent up uncertainty and energy. And I think we saw that, right? Whether it was Black Lives Matter or people storming the Capitol here in the US, or higher taxes on rich people, or going up against certain industries. I think we're seeing some of that come into play in the last couple of years, and it's going to impact big business. It's going to impact mining in a really large way. We do a lot of work outside of mining as well. So if you look at other industries, look at aviation, for example, they're under fire. They don't even know it, right? It started a couple of years ago with Boeing, the 737 MAX. They had a couple of crashes. COVID came. We didn't realize we had to fly so much. Then on the social front, they're a huge producer of GHGs. They're under fire for that, which isn't helped by, a bunch of billionaires going off into space. And then right now you've got, pilots not taking vaccines and all that stuff, but it's a mature industry, right? And like mining, it's coming under a lot of social pressure, GHGs, people protesting, people inside the industry kind of resisting and clinging on to the past. And I think it's going to all end up leading to some problems down the line very soon. And, another example of that, I think, would be Facebook, right? And they've had a no good, terrible week, month, year, maybe it'll be a decade. And that's something I think that the mining industry and other industries as well, but we're talking about mining today, should be grateful for, because mining, in a sense, is lucky that it's taken what I think is a temporary backseat to other industries as a target. And on a positive note, I think a lot of the big mining companies, and I'll speak, more broadly at Canadian mining companies, Australian mining companies as well, but Canadians in particular, I think are trying, don't seem to be squandering the opportunity to change and to do something with that. But what is really certain, no matter how you cut it, is that society is unhappy. And I think that deep down, people are feeling very uncertain, more uncertain than they ever have perhaps in their lives. And for them, something is missing. And while for the last few years, we've had plenty of people to sort of target, whether it was Trump or Bolsonaro or COVID or pandemics or murder hornets, the world is still looking for answers and scapegoats, and it will eventually find them. And big businesses like banking, like pharmaceuticals, like aviation, like natural resources, I think are still very much in the crosshairs.
So what would you say would be the greatest challenge in facing the mining industry today with all this flying around?
So a few years ago, about 2 years ago, we came out with a study, a global mining study, Stratalis did, on what were the top 3 uncertainties. We called it the CEO's agenda. There were three big takeaways. The third one, I have to say COVID, by the way, was not one of them. But I think they're still very true in determining who will be the winners and the losers. So the third one was that mining companies really need to figure out how to implement the new digital, right? If the old digital was dealing with all the noise and it was a lot of show and a lot of theater, the new digital is actually getting stuff done. I think that's a challenge for a lot of folks. The second was that talent matters and that recruiting and retaining people was going to become more and more difficult. I think that's incredibly true. And I don't know a single CEO that we work with that doesn't list that as one of their top challenges right now. But the third one, and I think it's probably the one, the first one, I'm sorry, and I think it's probably the one that's most important, I think for our talk today as well, was trust. And that trust is the new competitive advantage. And that for mining companies, the rules of the game, the things that matter to investors, to society, to the public have changed. And I think that message matters more now than it did even 2 years ago. I do think there's a bit of a challenge with the question itself. You asked about the mining industry, the greatest challenge facing the mining industry. I'm not 100% sure that there is a single mining industry to ask about, right? Oil sands and diamonds have precious little in common. I think the same goes for potash and lithium. It's a fact that the actions of the big base metal miners intentionally don't mirror those of thermal coal. People in gold play an entirely different game altogether. Mm-hmm. And the only real connection, right, is that we all take stuff out of the ground and that society tends to lump us together. But it is exceedingly hard for the industry to speak with a single voice. And it's even harder to do so to build trust as a single unit, especially because the strategy, and I think it's a good strategy for any one company, is to differentiate yourself by drawing a thin green line between you and the rest of the industry. And so because of that, I think the mining industry and any one mining company faces the potential for a Facebook problem, right? A couple of weeks ago, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, they were knocked offline for like 6 hours. The next day, a whistleblower told Congress it's a terrible, evil place. It's ruining children. It's endangering democracy. Maybe it's better that it just stays offline and never comes back. But that kind of stuff impacts reputation. It impacts your ability to recruit. It impacts your ability to insulate yourself against uncertainty and things that happen out of the blue. And when you look at Facebook, and I think you look at mining as well, you have to ask yourself the question, does society hate Facebook? Or do we just hate the internet and the ugliness about it? Do parts of society really hate mining, or do they just hate the coal companies? Or do they just hate like a bad actor? And if you're Facebook, you don't get the luxury of separating yourself from Amazon and the other tech companies. If you're an upstanding miner, you don't have the luxury of separating yourself from coal companies. Not that the coal companies aren't upstanding. Understand it's a perception thing. You just have to make sure that the rising tide carries all ships. And the challenge is that without some kind of enhancements of trust, some kind of warm, cozy trust quilt that the industry can put around itself to protect itself in the case of some sort of uncertainty, you're not really insulated. And so the big question, I think, is how do you build trust in a world that is increasingly focused on canceling anything it doesn't like? And I think that's a challenge for a mining company.
So would you say mining is like Facebook, or could you actually cancel mining?
Could you cancel mining? I'm going to go with the groupthink on this one. As much as I like to go against groupthink, and agree that you can't cancel mining, at least not yet. But you can cancel miners. Right. And you can make it a pretty unpleasant place to work and to make money. So, as with the mining industry, right? Yes, you can cancel Facebook, right? Facebook has a lot protecting it. We use it. Politicians can't, get their own wardrobes put together by themselves, let alone coordinate taking down an industry or the internet. The government's antitrust case is absolutely, loose. Investors keep buying the stock. I think it's up like 20 or 30% this year. And unlike mining, we don't really need Facebook, but then we don't really need any one mining company either. So in that way, like the mining industry, Facebook is lucky for now, right? It went down, people ran around in a panic and then promptly went to Twitter to tell everyone that Instagram was down because it was like so important that the internet is breaking, which it seems to be doing a lot of right now. But the loss of trust matters. Cambridge Analytica started it. And the thing is that Facebook as a business needs to transform and grow, just like the mining companies do. They need to buy new companies. And it's going to get harder and harder to obtain permission to do that from the government, just like it's going to be harder and harder to obtain mining licenses if you don't have the social license, if you have a trust issue. And I mean, to that end, I think mining and frankly, the rest of the world are going to have we kind of face a bit of a China problem right now, which is a big statement, right? I could be talking about Evergrande. I could be talking about Taipei. I could be talking about war. I could be talking about, supply chain issues. But what I really mean is China is trying to grow and transform over the next few decades and still manage decarbonization, just like mining companies are, community, indigenous rights, water stewardship, biodiversity. And it's just not, I just don't think it's balanceable right now. Mining is at the forefront of supplying the commodities the world is going to need in order to transform, in order to try and become a more GHG neutral world. The population is continuing to grow. We're looking to innovate. It's going to need a lot of minerals. And I think it's going to come at us fast, even faster than it's coming. And the industry, its operating platform, its ability to gather the right CapEx, the technology it needs, right? BEVs, we were just listening to the last guy, right? Ready to go. But, there's more than that. The system that puts it together, the machine learning, the biochar, the echo shipping won't be able to transform as quickly as demand is going to rise. And I think the industry is going to have to make some hard choices between upping production, CapEx, meeting profitability targets, and transforming at the same time. I think it's going to struggle to do all three in the time horizon that it's set for itself. And I think we're seeing signaling already from the Rios and the BHPs of the world. And if society doesn't believe in a purpose, it doesn't understand how we're all interconnected, how mining matters to the global success, I think it risks being derailed. And there isn't a Twitter to back us up, right? When mining goes down, but no one's looking that far down the path yet.
Is there any one thing you think that is going to impact the industry next, or one specific thing?
Did I mention trust? But getting more specific, I think the big showstoppers that eventually will impact things like trust always hit us by surprise, right? And they keep changing. As I mentioned, people as a whole tend to underestimate how quickly any one technology or transformative thing will happen, and overestimate how long it takes to make an impact. That's why we've been talking about electric cars for decades, right? They took forever to come to market, but boom, now they're here overnight. And I think 10 years ago, the buzz was all around mechanization, automation, artificial intelligence, and that labor would protest, right? That people would fight jobs. Robots are coming for our jobs. It hasn't happened yet because we underestimated the time it would take, but now it's coming. And very few people are paying attention. So while people look at the obvious stuff, a tailings dam or two falls. And while I think it's a fool's game to make predictions, since you asked, I don't think it's going to be GHGs. I think that's already being looked at sufficiently well. So I'm going to gamble on the next tailings being water. Because water is still being treated mostly as a tactical problem. I think even by those that are pushing water stewardship, it's in little pockets. Like BHP, for example, a couple of groups very passionate about it, pushing water stewardship. The Lassonde Institute of Mining at the University of Toronto has a water stewardship innovation project. But again, it's pockets of it. And you see glimmers of this already in mining. You have for years, right? Water is sacred to First Nations communities. Mining license doesn't happen. It's an issue in Chile. It's an issue in South America. Here in the US, the Colorado River is drying up. And we all went in a tizzy, right? So I think, though, a good impact to the water table, a good drought, and at a general level, this is going to matter more than it does today. So when it does happen, if it happens, but when it happens, whatever this thing may be, what's your buffer zone? And I think that as an industry, whatever currency of trust you've built up in your bank, that's the buffer that you're going to need, and which doesn't necessarily exist today.
Okay. So does this thinking apply to all miners? As you said, there isn't just one mining.
Yeah, I think so. I would seem. I mean, I think miners face different pressures than others, right? Now, the sort of mining that the world wants I think is a different question, as is the sort of mining that, investors are willing to invest in. I mean, there are the obvious metals that everybody talks about, right? Let's all say together. It's copper, nickel, lithium, rare earth minerals. Those are the ones we like to think we need. So I think while it isn't being done effectively to the average Jane or the average Joe, it's easier to make an argument that, as with semiconductor shortages and frankly, the global supply chain in general, certain things, certain parts of mining matter more to your everyday life. Like today, the White House said, right, that you should buy your Christmas stuff early. Shelves are going to be emptier than you're used to. Kellogg's is facing a cereal shortage, and because of this, right? These are things that people matter. They matter to them. It has a real connection. They resonate. So, I mean, have the folks that say Resolution Copper made an argument to my dad that his electric car is going to need them in 2035? No, but if they tried, I think it's less of a stretch because it connects to people in a personal way. I think at an individual, corporate, or a subsegment level, generalities really aren't enough. So you take something that's a little less popular, but keenly in focus this week, right? We almost missed an energy crunch in North America. China's in the middle of one. Europe's having a field day trying to warm itself up because it now needs the industries it tried to kill, and it didn't think far enough ahead. So if you're a coal miner out there, you might be tempted to take the money and run. I don't think you should, not all at first at least. What they need to do, and it speaks to the broader industry, is they need to reframe around a deeper purpose, a more fundamental scope. What is it that they do that really matters? They keep us warm. They power our lives. They have to remember that that's their long-term positioning. So what they need to do is extract subsidies from the Europeans in return for turning on the pipe so that they can reinvest in more alternative portfolios. Because this may not be the last time a crunch happens, but they aren't likely to happen very often for coal anymore. And you really shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste.
That's one way. Yeah, we've heard that from many politicians, haven't we? So isn't the industry focused on improving this? Like, we see the effort by the ICMM to create global standards, and the mining companies, especially the bigger ones, many of you've mentioned, touting the importance of metals to the transformation. So where should we look for the answers?
So, I mean, I think the things that, ICMM, big mining companies do, I think they're doing things, absolutely, right? But like I said before, I don't think that this is an advertising problem. I don't think the big mining companies are sitting back and waiting for the showstoppers to happen. I know they're not, right? I think the challenge is that it's more than just good messaging and advertising by big industry bodies. Let's be honest, that'll drive very slow change, I think, with regulators, with governments. It's good for recruiting maybe, but I don't think it's going to move the needle quickly enough when it comes to trust. People don't trust industry bodies and corporations to tell them the truth. It's flat out true. And even when they believe you, it doesn't resonate in a way that I think is authentic and moving and matters. I think that's going to take a different kind of movement. So you asked where we should look for answers, right?
Yeah, where should we look for that? Yep.
So I think the first challenge of that is to stop using the royal we. And it's not we. I think it's to more think about you and I. And what I mean is that the common and obvious answer to that question is to look at the companies that people talk about doing it well. The popular version of this, I think, is Tesla and Apple, right? They made something that was on the verge of being a commodity seem interesting, virtuous almost, as if they were doing something better for humanity and managed to insulate their brands at the same time. And I think these are two companies and industries that desperately need metals and mining more than anything else, right? These battery panels, these solar panels, these electric cars, these batteries, these rockets, they need that. And yet they're trying to draw a really thin green line between them and us. So much so that Apple went and invented a new kind of aluminum, right? And branded it differently. So I think what they're trying to do somewhat successfully is build goodwill and trust by broadcasting a higher purpose, one that appeals to you and I on a personal level. And when it works because they don't advocate for themselves. You do. I do. I mean, there is no greater advocate for Tesla or Apple than the general public. And I think that gets to the heart of it. If you want to build trust, you need to connect on a deeply personal level. And there's no way that an industry, this industry especially as a whole, is going to speak with one voice. Anyway, that's not really how authenticity is born. Purpose doesn't come from a company. It doesn't come from an industry. It comes from your heart. And I mean, mining is way more important than cars or cell phones, right? It's a core component of nearly everything that matters. It's like farming. It's like your health. If you're a farmer, you know you don't just grow corn, you feed the world. What you do matters. If you work in medicine or pharmaceuticals, you don't just make pills, you don't just serve up drugs, you heal. And that purpose extends to everyone in those industries, from the farmer to the person in accounting who pays the bills, to the nurse, to the person in procurement that makes sure that there's syringes at the hospital. That's something that people genuinely carry with them when they go to work. They understand the importance of not what they do, but why they do it. And they understand why it's important to others. And so ironically, I think the place that we need to look is actually inside mining, probably one of the greatest sources of uncertainty, and maybe one of the greatest eroders of trust in the recent future in mining industry. And that's tailings. We've done a lot of work in tailings in the last couple of years, helping companies think through their tech strategies and their roadmaps and their visions. And when you speak to the people that are in charge of tailings and managing and monitoring tailings, especially at these larger companies, you find something different, I think, than you necessarily would have noticed a few years back if you paid attention at all. You find a deeper purpose, a passion, a knowledge that what they do matters. Their purpose, they save lives, they prevent failures, they stand guard. And these are folks that believe that what they do is more important than themselves, more important than a mining company's results. They have a duty to society. One that I think if push came to shove, a lot of them would stand up for, fight the tide, and make sure that the right thing is done because they know they matter, because what they do matters, because they have a purpose. And that purpose, that commitment, it breeds trust, right? We trust people that are committed that way. So I think the interesting question is, the person behind the desk in procurement at a mining company, do they know why they matter to society? Do they have purpose? The purpose in digital, the person in digital, they're building an app to make sure that when the scoop shows up. They're about as far away from breaking a rock as you can get, right? Yeah. Do they understand how what they do impacts the world in a better way? So I think that the key is not thinking about this industry again, but getting to that deeply personal you and I.
So if it is all about a single person, then what could somebody in our industry do today, tomorrow, or the next week to help sort of show we have a purpose?
So I don't think it's a universal truth, and maybe I sit from a bias in where I sit and where a lot of us sit in the world. But I think COVID has caused a lot of people to take a fresh look at why they do what they do, and looking for meaning. You see it in people changing cities, changing jobs, right? The Great Migration, divorces, weddings. It's almost as if we're having a global midlife crisis. And look, some of us are just here for a paycheck, right? As an industry, but chances are if you ended up in the mining industry and you stayed, there was a reason. And you do have a connection to this industry, to the good you do, to the good it does, to the benefits you're giving to society. So I guess for a single person, I would say, and I think we can start here, right? I would ask everyone that's listening to pause for a minute and ask yourself this question. What is my why? Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I work in mining? And I think more importantly, why does what I do matter to the grandmother down the street, or the kids playing in the yard, or a fisherman on the East Coast? I think there are a lot of whys in there, a lot of possible whys, but which one is yours? Which one is your why? And I think, which is the one that you would be most comfortable authentically saying to a total stranger who came up to you and asked you, why do you work in mining? I think if you can't find your why, I would urge you to keep asking. Ask your friends, ask your colleagues, ask why they do what they do, and see if that resonates with you. And then go deeper, not just into what you do, but into how what you do help others. And I think this is the next really key point that we as an industry and the companies we work for need to figure out to make happen. Then share it. Because that's how trust is built. Trust is built by sharing our deeper personal purposes with the world. And it's through these authentic, genuine personal stories, I think, that change happens. That's the quilt we need. Each why that's told as a story makes up these portraits, right? And together they help to increase the trust, reduce the uncertainty that the industry experiences. So I think that's the secret. We and the companies we work for and the people who make them up need to focus not just on the obvious, GHG reduction, tailings dams, storytelling to investors, cutting costs, but in getting our people and ourselves to define and deliver our personal purposes, I think, as advocates for ourselves and for the industry. And by doing so, it might be possible to build a quilt around the industry for when uncertainty and challenges occur.
And if you're not in a mining company, but a supplier or a consultant, is it what
like a lot of the folks on the phone?
sort of, yeah.
I think we're all part of one ecosystem, right? I think it applies across the board. For me, I think it's a bit of a Benjamin Franklin moment. Sort of, we must all hang together, or we will surely hang separately. I think, again, back to Tesla, back to Apple, back to what makes the farmer in the agricultural industry something that is difficult to cut. When you've got farming subsidies, it's difficult to cut. When you're talking about healthcare, it's difficult to cut. Why? It's because the most powerful voices are those that come from the outside, and sometimes those that sit on the periphery, like suppliers, like consultants. Mm-hmm. Because folks that do the non-traditional work within the industry, or hold divergent views, or supply the industry, are the most powerful because they don't come from the center. Understanding what their purpose is and why they do what they do, I think is incredibly important part of the equation. Now, it's a little harder to do because if you work for, Sandvik a couple of minutes ago, right? Mm-hmm. If you work for Sandvik, right, understanding your why may be different than understanding Rio Tinto's why. But together, the things you do enable this magic that, sits in the cell phone. And that's, you're part of that halo. And it's important to understand how you make people's lives better. So for me, more than ever, I think it's clear that it's not what we do, but why we do it that matters. And that the smallest voices unified behind a single message, a message of trust that's made up of many, many individual messages of purpose, can build that protection that the industry needs to keep itself insulated in order to transform in the most uncertain times.
Great. Thank you very much. Lots to think about. I hope people are feeling a little, will start to look at the job a little more closely and realize, that I've always said, mining is one of the most important things we do in the world. It's mining and growing food and shelter. Those are the basics. I do want to open the floor for any questions. If anybody had any comments, even that for George, or did we want to maybe ask another question? We do have a lot of thank yous. It's an excellent speech. Maybe people are too busy deep in thought to want to contribute with the proper question.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me as always.
And
actually, Robert, there is one comment here, and maybe George, if you don't mind kind of expanding on it a bit. This is from Eric, and it says, "We matter because we give the building blocks to the world and individual lives better. Always great to hear from you, George. Like the focus on passion and trust. Big fan of the speed of trust. Our passion right now is to make geologists have a better experience when logging core." Just wondering what your thoughts are kind of on that as well, too. It's a great reference for you there.
I think, right, that all of us do, individual work. And I happen, just for what it's worth, I happen to like geologists quite a deal, because they're forced to deal with uncertainty all the time, making them some of the most creative people, believe it or not, in the industry, because you've got a lot of extrapolation going on there. I think, there's a focus on what we do, right? Making it easier for people to log core. But then there's that focus on every individual is going to have a different why. So your why, Eric, is going to be different, from someone else's why, and making sure that people can codify that and share it is critical. I just want to move to something else. In the military, right? Whether you are a general or a lieutenant or a sergeant on the ground or a private, you understand that taking that next hill serves a greater purpose. Now, the private doesn't have the same view that the general has, right? He's looking at the campaign. The sergeant doesn't have the same view. The private just needs to get that corner over there and set something up. The sergeant needs to coordinate, a squad or a platoon. And I think that each one of them has a why they do what they do, but it's unified behind, a shared mission. And I think getting each person, like that private, to find their why is critical in all of us moving forward. But again, it's not just finding it, it's sharing it, right? Because it's not going to be a commercial on BEVs from Rio that's going to drive my grandmother to suddenly believe that the mining industry is really, really, really important to her. It's going to be the stories I tell her about the people that work in it and the work we do, and why it's cooler and more important than she may realize. And I think that's kind of a critical part of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it really does. Thank you. I guess along those things, like with what's happening now, like it seems like the green side, the environmental side, which was the ones who really attacked the mining more than anybody, are sort of realizing that like their whole future, the green economy, depends on mining. And again, in terms of a chance to redefine our purpose again as being more than just, trying to make money, here's a chance to really say like, yes, we make the world go round, whether and even in, and here's a chance that we are part of the solution. We're not part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a good chance for us to, like you say, redefine our purpose and make it seem more.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's important to tell the stories, right? Because any one individual has a hard time seeing the bigger picture. I could make an argument, right, that there are plenty of people, in the US and elsewhere, right, that really rally against capitalism, rally against big business, rally against, all of that. But then you want a lot of social change and funding of programs. Well, those taxes come from somewhere, right? But that's not what, the person that's rallying against it cares about. So you've got to connect with them on a level and not try to convince them that, capitalism and rich people are good. I think in the same way, the folks that want the world to be a greener place, and I don't really know anybody that objects to that in principle.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right? They're not really interested in the fact that, today at least, that's why you need to, take bits out of an open pit and blow things up and so forth and so on. But it's a personal story that might connect and help them understand what other people do matter. We connect on a personal level. That's how humans work, right?
Yeah.
We don't care about, and with the exception of patriotism and religion, we generally speaking don't care about these big monoliths. We care about personal stories, and that's what drives change.
Thanks. Do we still have a bit more time, Laura, or?
We do, and we actually have another question from the audience too.
Oh, okay.
It's from Andy, and it says, will investment flow towards purpose?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it does. Yes. I think investment flows toward purpose and I think we're seeing it in a lot of the green investing, the ESG funds. We see it in a lot of brands that succeed, brands that set a very clear purpose that goes beyond mission-driven cultures as well. That goes beyond simply making money, but fundamentally, investors tend to be in the business of making money. So I mean, yes, purpose and profit. You know, what are those pillars, right? It's purpose and profit and planet, right? And people, but I think you still have to make money. And I think that's the challenge, right? If you build a purpose-driven mining company, but it doesn't have a reason to be from a profitability point of view, I think you'll struggle. I think if you have a concept with legs from an operating point of view and purpose, I think that's exceedingly powerful.
We did get another question. Somebody was asking, Matt, your evaluation regarding Indigenous community consultation and engagement. I guess how you would feel how important that is for that to be pursued.
Well, I mean, I think not speaking to any one nation or any one group, because I think it applies broadly and importantly across most, God, maybe all, well, almost all of the mining territories, the major ones for sure. I think it's important. It's important for two reasons, right? But I'm going to focus more on the one that sort of resonates with our conversation today, which is around having that social permission to be there, having that ability to operate, reducing the uncertainty and the social pushback from the work you do. Now, I think there is and again, it depends what side of the fence you sit on, right? I think there is also perhaps a moral and an ethical reason to engage, and that reason goes beyond simply making it easy to mine in an area where you want to. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It's to your question. You know, companies that actually give a hoot about this sort of thing, that actually do it. I think that's part of a shared purpose. That's part of what makes the industry, you know, greater than it was perhaps in the past. And it's part of the stories that need to be shared, but it's probably not a story that should be shared by Rio Tinto or Vale or, you know, Agnico Eagle, but by the people who work at those companies and by the communities that are affected. You want authenticity, you want people to believe. It's the people who are impacted, who live with it, who form a part of that network that need to do the talking, and not the advertising agency you hire to make the fancy video, which is good, but isn't really going to be driving a lot of change, in my opinion.
Thank you. No, that's very true. I guess if, like I say, the people who are affected can give you a vote of confidence, and that you know, word of mouth is still the best recommendation, and that's in a way that's a form of word of mouth.
Yeah.
Anything else come in, Laura? I'm flipping between the Q&A and the chat to see if anything else has come in.
Yeah, there's lots, and George, everybody's enjoying listening to your thoughts, and maybe if you can just expand a little bit more on mining companies are used to communicating with investors and communities, but not society, and where should they start?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, so let me try and think of this a little bit differently. I mean, look, a mining company is a big corporate entity, but it's made up of lots of little people, right? And it's this people like you and I that really need to do the communication. I don't think that mining as a whole does an effective enough job of getting its own people to be champions in the broader world. It does a lovely job, I think, of getting its corporate communications departments to share those messages. But I also don't think, I mean, you know, it's kind of weird, right? And it's not a truism. Okay, it doesn't hold true everywhere. So that's probably the right way to put it. But I think unlike some industries, there isn't a unified story that we tell ourselves, you know, and it's easy with policemen, right? It's easy with nurses, right? It's easier with farmers, right? gets a little bit harder when you start to stretch in the periphery. I mean, how does my banker contribute to society? I don't know. But mining should be easy. Mining should be easy. And the challenge, right, is in an industry that's going to transform, that's working on transforming. And we really are working on transforming. The how we do it is sometimes different than why we do it and what we achieve for the world. And I think we're getting to a point slowly but surely. Like let's face it, mining is by its very nature not a sustainable business, right? You cannot put the land back the way you found it, and you can't go on forever. It's just not a sustainable business that way. But it's improving, and it's improving in enough of a way that it may be sustainable enough so that we can focus on some of the good news and the stories of what we enable. And I think that's what we really need to work on right now. And I think people haven't, because it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, let's not pretend. What are you going to do tomorrow? Are you going to go and you're going to say, listen, corporate wide email, everybody, I really need you to sit back and think about your purpose, and then I need you to go tell a friend. But that's the sort of thing we need to work on. And that goes for all of us. Robert, Laura, you and I, everybody, because that's what's critical. And it's weird and it's awkward because most people don't even like talking about themselves. But I think it's a critical part of evangelizing, the benefits that the industry has.
Yeah, Tom, we've gotten so much negative press that nobody wants to really stick their head up and say anything. They'd rather just keep their head down and keep doing what they're doing. But as you said, there is a big transformation going on in the industry. Sustainability is becoming at the forefront of everything we do. And all those stories of how damaging it is are becoming less and less. And so we should be able to, turn that focus into all the positive we do.
And it's funny, as slow as many mining companies are to implement, because it's a tough industry to make changes when you want to follow a critical path, you'd be surprised how ahead of the curve some of the thinking can be. I've had the pleasure to do some work, with the military. And there's been on more than one occasion where they've been kind of curious, like, so what is it you're working on over on the industrial side with drones and robots and underground scanning? And we need to find people in caves and, we do some cool stuff. We're looking at cool things because it makes sense that other industries that you would think are way ahead of the curve on you aren't necessarily doing. And it's kind of neat. I'm really quite excited to see where the industry is in a couple of decades.
Great. How are we for time now, Laura?
Actually, we're still good at, because if you don't mind, we do have one more question or comment. Maybe Robert, if you want to read that one, just because it's a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, sure. Okay, this is from Ahmad. We explore natural resources for building civilization, prosperity, and a brighter future. This is the holding mining company of Indonesia Noble Purpose. To deliver these require the company profitable, then balancing is most important. It requires sincerity at all levels in the internal company staff and government. I'm not sure if that's actually a question, but more, I guess, an observation that I guess he's saying the company needs to be profitable in order to balance everything, all the things, I guess.
I mean, look, companies need to be profitable in order to simply exist, right? I mean, so let's remember it is a business still. But I think, here's the thing, right? A lot of the folks that are in mining, a lot of the folks that do this know that what they do matters. And yeah, we all know we need to be profitable. It's a given, right? It needs to be safe. It needs to be profitable. Does it need to be profitable this year? Depends on your time horizon. Harder call to make if you're CEO. But the question isn't whether you know it. The question is whether other people know it and you've shared it. And whether you've done it in a way that resonates and that is authentic with them. I don't doubt that, given the chance, a geologist, or if you stop and you ask someone who's at the face bolting, could tell you why what they do matters. May not think about it very often, may not share it very often, but they could. It's really a question of whether or not, you know, the person that they go to at the laundromat, or, you know, the folks they buy groceries from, or I don't know, their kid's school teacher, knows why what you do matters. Well, we have a certain degree of respect for certain industries. I respect farmers, you know. Of course, most of us think of a farmer, right, as a person, you know, corn and a machine, not as Monsanto, but, you know, policemen, farmers, nurses, we have respect. They're such fundamental fishermen, such fundamental industries. And that's because we know their stories. We know that what they do is hard. We know that what they do matters. You know, Canada, South Africa, mining is a critical part. It's a critical core industry, but it doesn't extend everywhere. Not to every part of the country, not to every corner of it, and certainly not more broadly outside of the ecosystems like Sudbury. I think getting those stories out farther and wider, I think, are critical.
And I guess this last one that came in,
Sure.
I guess it's getting a little in an area here. It seems there is an indoctrination in our schools towards the negative impacts of industry in general. How can the mining industry combat this? Is it on their radar? I guess that's the organization getting together and doing counter marketing, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, you know, that's one of those things that takes all of us. I'll tell you a story. My daughter goes to a school. She just started it this year here. It is very focused on social justice and progressivism, and it tends to be a little anti-business. And it's a very good school, and she likes it. But you know, she comes home and I hear what they say, and I'm like, okay, well, it's one point of view. Let me share a little of what your dad does, and you know why it's cool, and this and that. And I think, you know, that's how life works, right? Yeah, we're you've got to be there. You've got to tell your story. You've got to share it with your kids and with others. And at the end of the day, yeah, that's the trend we're in, folks. I mean, there's just no escaping it right now. This is what we got. Yeah. And there's a reason why it's here, right? I mean, it didn't like pop up overnight, you know. There's a reason why Facebook is where it's at, and there's a reason why mining is where it's at, and it's going to take some work to climb back. I think the difference is, right, that mining's actually doing something, whereas Facebook is following the path they want to path, and they're barreling their way through, and they're hoping and praying that they barrel fast and far enough before somebody stops them. I don't think that's the case here. So, you know, it's just now time to come up on the other side of that curve and start telling those stories, because I think there is authenticity that exists behind them. And a lot of the new folks in the industry feel passionately. I mean, again, you know, and it's hard to do this sometimes, right? There's Dave Chappelle has this show on Netflix, and it's got some transphobic jokes in it. So 3 people at Netflix barged into a corporate meeting, and, you know, and they got canned, or at least they got put on leave. At least one of them did, for doing that. And I kind of think that while I understand what the executives there did, the mining industry needs more people from the inside telling these stories and speaking up. Now, it's a dangerous, slippery slope. I'll admit it. But it's a slope that breeds trust and authenticity. It's a slope that breeds transparency. So how do you get those divergent voices? How do you get the young voices? Because they're in there. I mean, I assure you they're in there. Yeah. To speak up. And that's one of the things I think we need to think about.
Okay. We did have one last question come in from Gaspar Lima. If you needed to put a weight percentage-wise on trust as one of the competitive advantages, along with innovation, cost benefit, what would that be? I guess it's
that's
kind
interesting.
Yeah.
It's like asking me to choose between my children. You know, I love you, Elizabeth, but I really liked Jack more. 60% to 40.
And like I said, it's kind of an esoteric thing versus something with
No,
innovation and cost benefit.
It's an interesting question. It seems esoteric, but it's at the end of the day, when we prioritize what we invest in, do we invest in more monitoring technology? Do we invest in dry press tailings? What do we invest in? We're kind of making that choice. I think at the end of the day, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So Maslow had this hierarchy of needs. He said, well, the first thing is the functional needs. You got to have food, you got to be healthy, you got to have a roof over your head. And then your next level of needs is emotional. You got to feel good about yourself. You got to feel like you have a purpose. And the higher is I recall what it is, but it's something more about self-attainment. I am a good person kind of thing. I think the same might apply here, which is, at the end of the day, the company doesn't exist if it can't make some money. So it has to function. It has to function from an operating point of view. And then above that, I think I'd put them all. So if I have to choose, if you're going to go broke tomorrow, you got to do what you got to do. But if that's the case, you probably got bigger problems than worrying about what your purpose is.
That's true. I guess if you're going to go broke and you have no trust, there's a good chance you're not going to be unbroke again. But if you go broke and you keep your trust,
it's a good year for M&A. It's a good year to be bought if you're going to go broke. There you go.